that enthusiasts have preserved over the last half-century, which all began in 1950 when volunteers like these started work on this very railway, returning it to service after it had fallen foul of the harsh economic facts that railways had had their day. But the enthusiasts knew they hadn't. The far-sighted individuals who assembled in a Birmingham pub and formed the Talyllyn Railway Preservation Society, the first of its kind in the world, probably hadn't heard the word heritage. But they knew that they wanted to be able to enjoy the sights and sounds of railways well into the future. And so it all started with this little engine, Dolgoch, and this stretch of railway in West Wales. And look what it's led to. For now, it's led us to the Talyllyn's headquarters at Wharf Station in the little seaside town of Tywyn. For more than 50 years now, passengers have been the railway's staple traffic, but it was built to transport slate from the quarries above Abergynolwyn in the Cambrian Mountains down to a transshipment wharf next to the Cambrian Railway's main line. The sidings here were full of slate wagons, but astute management had realised even before the age of the motor car that tourists could be persuaded to enjoy the delights of little railways like this one. However, commercial operation was risky. The slate industry declined and ceased altogether in 1946. So the death of the railway's owner, Sir Haydn Jones, in 1950 seemed to be the end for the Talyllyn. But an enthusiast by the name of Tom Rolt didn't want it to die as well. So he called a meeting of like-minded enthusiasts in Birmingham who formed the society, which reached agreement with Sir Haydn Jones' widow to run the railway. With volunteers, the need to pay staff disappeared and changed the economic outlook for the railway altogether. And after a concerted effort by the enthusiasts, it reopened and has never looked back. This, the railway's other original locomotive, looks as pristine today as she did nearly a century and a half ago when she was delivered for the opening of the railway in 1865. However, when the enthusiasts arrived at Pendra in 1950, Talyllyn was derelict. Only Dolgoch could be persuaded to turn a wheel, and she had to take the brunt of the work in that year. Try to turn your mind back to 1950. Rationing was still endemic. The railways were despised as an outdated mode of transport. Tourism hardly existed, and the Talyllyn Railway was virtually unusable. It took quite a leap of the imagination to believe that preservation of railways would be viable, let alone feasible. The enthusiasts bought a couple of extra locomotives from another derelict railway, the Corris Railway, naming this one in memory of Sir Haydn, whose dogged sense of honour to those the railway employed had seen it survive so long. The works here at Pendra, coaches, track and stations, all had to be overhauled, or rather virtually rebuilt, and the immaculate condition of them today is a tribute to the pioneers. The town of Tywyn is seen in the background as Dolgoch sets out from Pendra into the lush farmland and up the beautiful and unchanging valley, as the railway's website describes it, for the 7¼ mile run. The first stop today, and the last in 1951, when it was the limit of operations, is passed at speed by the Talyllyn's homegrown and 6th working steam engine, which is named in honour of the founding father, Tom Rolt. The best-known feature of the Talyllyn is at Dolgoch Falls, where Tom Rolt is seen again departing from the station, which was used for many of the early publicity photographs, showing engines taking water from the tank on the left here. The viaduct over the falls themselves were also featured. At Quarry Crossing, the keeper, Amanda, shows a clear road to a train approaching downhill. Another is waiting in the loop for the road to carry on to the top of the line. The approaching engine wears the Reverend Audrey's fictional livery, which was based on the Tallaght Linn and did much to publicise the railway in the 1950s. The original carriages of the Tallaght Linn were overhauled by the preservation team and remain in use today, running as a vintage train, usually with one or other of the original locomotives, as seen waiting in the loop here. Many new coaches were needed over the years as the railway grew from strength to strength, and each year carried more and more passengers. In its Golden Jubilee year, a number of special events took place to celebrate its rescue, and it can now look back on many successful years, its future undoubtedly secure. This is the view many people see of the railway. Little trains climbing up the side of the hill, a timeless scene. The station at Abergynolwyn was one of the preservationists' main achievements. This was always the passenger terminus, as the line beyond here served only the quarries. A new station building opened here in 1969, with the associated facilities, such as the refreshment rooms, always popular with passengers and visiting enthusiasts. Outside stands Douglas, the only engine on the line which came from anywhere outside Wales. This locomotive, number 6 in the fleet, came from the government's Air Service Construction Corps railway at Calshot near Southampton. It had to be re-gauged to 2'3", the Tallaght Linn's somewhat unusual gauge, and the reason that Tallaght Linn locos do not visit other lines and visiting engines are not seen here. The railway has a few internal combustion locomotives, numbers 5, 8, 9 and 10. They're normally used for shunting or engineering duties, as here. They were very useful when the extension to the quarries was being rebuilt in the 1970s to make it suitable for passenger traffic. A new passenger station opened at Nant Gwernol in 1976 when the extension was completed. The old quarries are no longer accessible, but visitors can enjoy walks in the woods nearby. The lake that the railway shares its name with is a further 3 miles beyond here and has no connections with the railway except the name. The next Welsh narrow gauge railway we visit is a very different affair and the most recent to be preserved. From its terminus alongside the Cambrian Railway station at Aberystwyth, which it now shares, the Vale of Rydal takes passengers up to the well-known local beauty spot at the Devil's Bridge, opening as late as 1902. It also once served lead mines in the Rydal Valley and transported timber, but tourists were always its prime purpose. Although promoted independently, the Cambrian Railways soon took it over, and it fell into the hands of the Great Western Railway in 1923. 2 locomotives were built at the famous Swindon Works in GWR style, one of which we see departing here. The railway subsequently became part of British Railways, who continued to operate it until 1989, when its engines became the last steam locomotives to work on BR, and the railway became the first part of BR to be privatised. The new owners set to work to upgrade it, rebuilding this bridge as one of their first priorities. The railway runs alongside the Avon Rydal for a while before setting out up into the hills. A water tank at Nantronnen enables locomotives to top up their water supplies before they start the main part of the climb. In the time since it was privatised, a great deal of foliage alongside the line has been cut back to give spectacular views over the Rydal Valley. The locomotives in stock are amongst the largest to run on the narrow gauge. This is the terminus at Devil's Bridge, and visitors can walk to the Devil's Punch Bowl, Jacob's Ladder and Minack Falls. Two and sometimes 4 trains a day run out and back from Aberystwyth daily in the high season, opening times being from mid-April to late October. Moving south, we come to the Typhy Valley Railway, built on the trackbed of a branch which once connected to the line from Aberystwyth to Carmarthen. The size of the bridge at Henlon Station rather gives the game away. This was one of the original railway's stations, and the narrow gauge line runs from here westwards towards Newcastle Emlyn, to which it's hoped the railway will eventually run. Alan George is one of many small Hunslet-built quarry locomotives that worked in the famous De Norwich slate quarries in Snowdonia. Locomotives which run like a seam throughout this series of programmes. This particular one dates from 1894. The railway follows the course of the River Typhy, which carves a rocky path through the forest. 2 intermediate stations are passed. This is one of them, which was the terminus for a while. Here there is a bridge whose Welsh name translates as Shaky Wooden Bridge, although it's made of stone. The name refers to the scaffolding erected to build it when the railway was constructed between 1885 and 1895. The present terminus is at Llandafriog. It's hoped to continue construction to Newcastle Emlyn, but the railway suffered a grievous blow at the end of 2001, when its coaching stock was destroyed by fire in a wanton act of vandalism. The southern end of the line from Aberystwyth to Carmarthen forms the basis of the Gwili Railway, the most westerly standard gauge preserved line in Wales. The former single-line wayside station at Bronwyth Arms is the base of its operations, and it's situated a few miles to the north of Carmarthen itself. Despite the headboard carried by this Great Western pannier tank, it doesn't go to Carmarthen itself, but westwards. Like so many railways, its course follows a river, in this case the Gwili, from which it takes its name. This was always a minor cross-country railway, so the Great Western Manners would have been the largest engines to have seen work here. This one is running along the open stretch of line shortly after leaving Bronwyth Arms. Working in the direction is against the collar, as the line is very steeply graded as it negotiates the river valley. The River Gwili is crossed just before the first station is reached at Llwyfan Cerrig. The train seen here is hauled by one of the Great Western's large prairies, those shedded at Carmarthen being regular engines on this line. The views of the river dominate the journey to the present terminus at Danacoed, from where we see the large prairie depart with a passenger train back to Bronwyth Arms. The line is open on Sundays from May to September and all week in August, with trains running on other days such as holidays and some mid-weekdays in the summer. The Brecon Mountain Railway is a narrow-gauge railway built on the trackbed of the former Brecon and Merthyr Railway, which ran through the mountains connecting the two towns. A Swiss-style station welcomes passengers to the railway's headquarters at Pant Station, a little way out of the town of Merthyr Tydfil, where trains start their journey into the Brecon Beacon Mountains and the National Park. A visual connection can be made with the American Rockies, as this locomotive, 1930-built Baldwin, is similar to the engines on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, an American mountain railroad. The caboose is American, but the coaches are styled on mid-European lines, and this locomotive is actually a 1908-built German one named Graf Schwerin-Lurwitz. It's seen at the intermediate station Pontyskil, where the railway has holiday accommodation available in the old signal box. There is only road access here for residents. The railway has a running line of some 3.5 miles and, curiously, doesn't have steep gradients. In fact, it's downhill from Pant to Pontyskill and relatively level beyond Pontyskill. Access to the forests is restricted for motor vehicles, and the authorities encourage tourists to leave their cars at Pant and use the railway to enter the Brecon Beacons National Park. From Pontyskill, the railway runs around the shores of the Fechin Reservoir, which, to all intents and purposes, is a very attractive lake. The terminus today is at the northern end of the reservoir, at Donegal, but the railway hopes to extend to the top of the old railway at Torpantu, renowned as the location of the highest tunnel in Great Britain. Trains run from March to October, daily from June to mid-September. At the eastern end of the Welsh Valleys can be found another railway, the Pontypool and Blaenavon Railway. This is built on part of an LNWR branch that closed to passengers as long ago as 1941 and to general goods traffic in 1954. However, it lived on as a mineral line to 1980, and it was a valuable link for coal traffic. The Pontypool and Blaenavon Railway was created in 1983 after final closure, and is built on that part of the line above Blaenavon itself. In the background can be seen some of the large collection of mainline locomotives which have been assembled here. Their restoration is a long-term aim, the most prominent ones being Great Western heavy freight engines of the 28XX class. A GWR pannier tank is expected to be the first to steam, but in the meantime a varied selection of industrial tanks has been seen on the line over the years, such as this one, Brookfield, a powerful 060 Bagnall tank, which is now at Magnapp's farm in Essex. The railway is the principal one to celebrate the history of the coal industry that was once the lifeblood of the Welsh Valleys. Industrial locomotives such as this being part of the culture here. The bleak landscape shows the scars that the mining industry inflicted on the land, and the Big Pit Mining Museum is close by. The names of the two stations, Blaenavon Furnace Sidings and the one at the top, Whistle Inn, somehow seem to reflect the history of the railway and its place in the order of things. Trains run on Sundays from April to September. And at Christmas, Santa specials are worked, whilst special events such as Thomas Days are also held. In the heart of Wales, and a different range of hills, one of the famous narrow-gauge railways to fall into the hands of the nationalised British Railways through the Great Western's takeover of the Cambrian Railways is the Welshpool and Llanfair Railway, at whose new Raven Square station we prepare to join a train. The railway's original terminus was on the other side of town at the mainline station, but today most visitors arrive here to take a trip into the hills. The locomotive is one of the original ones, built for the railway when it opened in 1903. The railway took passengers from its opening, providing a useful if slow route for the produce of the little town of Llanfair Corinion to reach the outside world. This engine, number 2, was named the Countess, whilst its twin was the Count. Both were westernised during their Great Western days, with boilers that are very distinctly the products of Swindon Works. Whilst 2 locomotives sufficed for the traffic the railway carried until its closure in 1956, today's preservationists have added a cosmopolitan range of additional engines, including this one from Sierra Leone, which fits in rather well with the native machines, as she was built in Britain. The way the railway hugs the contours is well seen here, as it climbs hills and runs around the edges of fields, seemingly part of the countryside itself. It's a superb example of how all those little railways, which were authorised under the Light Railways Act of 1896, were able to cut their costs and survive for a few years before road traffic put them out of business. One of the scenic highlights comes as the railway comes down into the Banwy Valley for the last part of the run into Llanfair Corinion. This is a Santa special, which, as for many preserved railways, provides out-of-season revenue. The original terminus at Llanfair Corinion is the railway's headquarters today, the station boasting well-equipped workshops and locomotive servicing facilities, as well as the important things such as a large souvenir shop and restaurant. The largest standard gauge preserved railway in Wales is the Llangollen Railway, whose headquarters station is poised spectacularly on the banks of the River Dee, in the heart of the little town of Llangollen. This was a Great Western Railway cross-country line which connected the Welsh coast at Barmouth to the rest of its network at Rwabon on the North and West Main Line. The railway follows the course of the river closely throughout its length, the river having carved out a wide and deep valley through the millennia. Llangollen had been a popular resort since before the railway age and has many hotels and attractions for the visitor. The Eisteddfod, held every year in the town, has a permanent site which can be glimpsed here beyond the railway on the hillside to the right. A picturesque chain bridge over the river is set alongside the railway's first intermediate station at Berwyn. The viaduct here would need extensive repairs at the beginning of the new millennium, and the railway set up a fund to finance the work required. The station itself is one of the most unusual on the route, with its half-timbered Elizabethan look. Great Western locomotives in BR liveries are the favoured image for the railway itself. The line sticks to the riverside throughout its length, except for a short tunnel between Berwyn and the next station, Glyndefrydwy. Here we see a Great Western auto train departing with the service back to Llangollen. After the railway was closed in 1965, all the track was removed. The Preservation Society has reinstated all the track and station artefacts from scratch, even the platforms, achieving a true period atmosphere at all its stations. This is Carrog, which has been the railway's western terminus since 1996, and a further extension will see the railway through to Corwen in due course. As befits the largest railway in Wales, services run year-round, although only on a few days in January and November. Further along on the trackbed of the line to Dolgellau and Barmouth, alongside Bala Lake, a narrow-gauge railway has been established. At Bala Station, we see another of the ubiquitous De Norwich Quarry Hunslet tanks departing with the train for Llanarwchlyn. This engine, Maid Marian, is one of 2 De Norwich engines on the line, which coincidentally opened in the same year as the revived Llangollen Railway, 1971. The carriages were especially built for the line. The original station buildings survive at Llanarwchlyn, the engineering base and headquarters of the railway. Maid Marian returns to Bala. Her companion here is Holy War. Services run almost daily from mid-April to the end of September and at Christmas. Once upon a time, a line ran from Bala Junction over the mountains to Blaena Festiniog, where it made a connection to the legendary Festiniog Railway. The celebrated 2-foot gauge line has its headquarters at Porthmadog, once called Portmadog, and we see one of the equally celebrated Fairlie double engines leaving from the harbour station, with yet another crowded train heading up into the slate-filled mountains. Trains cross from Porthmadog on a causeway known as the Cob, owned by the railway, which charges motor vehicles a toll for using its linked road. In the corner here is the famous Boston Lodge Works, where the Festiniog has built and renovated many of its unique locomotives, including this single Fairlie. For many car users, this station, Minforth, provides their first glimpse of the railway, as it's situated right alongside the main road. The locomotive at the head of this train is a visitor from Bressingham Museum. Many locomotives visit the Festiniog, where they get a chance to stretch their legs on the 13-mile railway. Often thought of as the first preserved railway, which was the Talyllyn as we've seen, it could be argued that the Festiniog isn't preserved at all, as it's still owned by the original Festiniog Railway Company that was incorporated by Act of Parliament in 1832. Only the ownership of the shares has changed. It was the first major narrow-gauge railway in the world, and in 1865 it became the first in Great Britain to be allowed to use steam locomotives to haul passenger trains on a gauge less than standard gauge. The railway was built to transport slate from the quarries high in the mountains above Blaena Festiniog, using horses to haul the empty wagons up to the quarries and gravity to bring the full ones down. Steam improved the working efficiency immeasurably. These can still be seen today on gala and special services. The brakesmen for the gravity train can be seen aboard this uphill slate train. 4 steam engines were supplied in 1863 to 1864 by George England & Co. This is the 4th, Palmerston. Strange little open vehicles were used for passenger carrying when this commenced in 1866. But the railway was experiencing rapid expansion and needed to increase its capacity. Doubling the line was considered, but was impractical. So the solution was to build more powerful engines. Thus was born the famous double Fairley, a single locomotive with 2 engine units mounted on bogies that could negotiate the sharp curves of the Festiniog Railway. Although they have 2 drive units and 2 boilers, there is just one central firebox with driver and fireman on opposite sides of the locomotive. Over the years, the coaching stock has improved immeasurably, these modern bogie coaches being quite the equivalent in comfort terms of much larger ones, and most trains carrying buffet bars with corridor connections throughout. The slate business faded rapidly in the 1930s, and the war put paid to the tourist trade, so in 1946 the railway ceased operations. There were no powers for abandonment in the Enabling Act, so the line lay derelict until a group of enthusiasts bought the shares in 1954 and reopened the line the next year. At the same time, however, the British Electricity Authority flooded part of the line at the top end to create the Tanagriziau Reservoir, seen in the foreground here as the first locomotive back in steam in the new era, Prince, runs along the new trackbed that the determined new owners eventually built and opened in 1978. The original line formation was rejoined near Tanagriziau station, starting away from which we see 2 of the new locomotives acquired by the railway from other lines in the 1960s. Linda from the Penryn Quarries Railway and Mountaineer from France, the latter being an American First World War locomotive for the British Army. The last mile of the line, which opened in 1982 to complete the route back to Festiniog, runs beneath the Slate Mountains that gave rise to the railway. Here we see both single and double Fairleys heading to the terminus along this very picturesque part of the line. The double Fairleys have become synonymous with the Festiniog Railway. Indeed, a symbolic representation is used as the railway's marketing logo. 2 brand new ones have been built in recent years. Here is David Lloyd-Jones, on trials before completion in 1992, leaving the 1982 terminus at Blaena Festiniog. This brand new station was built with the help of many grants and has direct connections to the standard gauge line from Llandudno, seen to the left of our final shot. To complete our review here, it's worth noting that you can travel on the Festiniog Railway any month of the year and on any day from April to October. At present, totally separate from the Festiniog Railway is the Welsh Highland Railway, whose terminus in the selfsame Porthmadog is literally on the other side of the tracks, next to the standard gauge line in Pwllheli. Here we see a train departing behind Gellert, a 1953-built Bagnall. The original Welsh Highland Railway was built in the 1920s to connect Carnarvon to Porthmadog and the Festiniog Railway, but it foundered in 1937. However, it wasn't forgotten, and a dedicated band of enthusiasts slowly built a new Welsh Highland Railway on the site of the old Exchange sidings alongside the BR station, opening on the 1st of August 1980. Perhaps the biggest event in the new company's story was the restoration of this locomotive, Russell, a genuine survivor from the 1923 Welsh Highland Railway. Here we see her on shed at Gellert's Farm Works, a visit to which is part of the return ride on the railway. The famous Carnarvon Castle never saw trains of the original Welsh Highland Railway, but from 1997 the new Welsh Highland Railway has run trains from a terminus under the medieval walls of the town, which was already one of North West Wales' major tourist attractions. The railway uses Bayer Garrett locomotives purchased from South Africa, the largest locomotives ever built for the 2-foot gauge. This is number 138, leaving on the first part of the new railway. Everything else about this railway is new. The coaches have been specially designed, the rails are brand new, and this formation is new. It shares the old trackbed with a cycleway and footpath, separated by a fence. The new railway meets the old at Dinas. At least the new railway moves on to the formation of the original Welsh Highland here, at a station which was the junction for the narrow gauge line with the standard gauge line from Bangor to Pwllheli, over whose trackbed the railway has run to here. This is the headquarters of the new railway, with all the workshops and locomotive sheds built here. Curiously, the old standard gauge station buildings survive and have now been given a new lease of life. The second phase of the line opened in 2000, from Dinas to 14 on a dedicated right-of-way. The train scene here includes the first ever narrow gauge Pullman car, the second to last coach in the train. Wanfor would remain the terminus only for so long as the extension works beyond here took to build. It would also become the contractor's base as the rails spread slowly back along the formation of the old railway. The modern Welsh Highland is set for a far more important role than the original, as today the authorities want to encourage visitors to the Snowdonia National Park to forsake their cars and let the train take the strain. But that's a pleasure when you travel on this exciting venture, and one day you'll get back to Porthmadog. For now, you can always take yourself off to the adjacent hostelry. Right in the heart of Snowdonia is Llyn Padarn, on the south side of which is the small town of Llanberis. The mountains in the background are the foothills of Snowdon itself, which is climbed by a unique rack railway, whose station in the little town is marked by a pall of smoke as we look across the lake. But we're not going there yet. First, we're going to visit the slate quarries on the north side of the lake, whose railway system was the original home of all those little Hunslet locomotives that keep popping up throughout this series of programmes. These are the Dinorwic quarries, whose workings were known as the galleries, the straight horizontal cuts on which the little engines slaved away until the railway system was phased out in the 1960s. 4 of the little engines still work on part of the old company's property today, on the Llanberis Lake Railway, and are seen outside the stone-built workshops and sheds which have been converted into the Welsh Slate Museum. Visitors can enjoy a train ride along the track bed of the old 4-foot gauge Padarn Railway, which used to connect the Dinorwic quarry system to Port Dinorwic on the Menai Straits. Today, the railway runs from Gilfach Thea station on the Padarn Park, from which we see locomotive number 2, Thomas Bach, departing. From above, we see a double-header with Una piloting the yellow Dolbardin. The green engine belongs to the Welsh Slate Museum, normally remaining on static display there, but it's allowed 2 or 3 steamings a year. The other 3 locomotives belong to the Llanberis Lake Railway and work throughout its season, which runs from March to October. The trains run for about 2 miles along the shores of the lake, a passing loop existing at the intermediate station of Cey Llydan, at which a short stop is made on the return journey for sightseeing. The Cwm Derwen Woodland Centre is here, and it houses an audio-visual display, as well as boasting a nature trail and adventure playground for the little ones. Now it's time to go over to Llanberis, to the base station of the Snowdon Mountain Railway, the only rack railway in Great Britain. In fact, it could be in Switzerland at first glance, since all its steam locomotives and the track are of Swiss manufacture to the Swiss ABT system specifications. The railway was opened in 1896 to transport visitors to the top of the highest mountain in England and Wales, 1,085 metres above sea level. That's 3,494 feet to most of us, 66 feet below the actual summit. It has gradients of between 1 in 8 and 1 in 5.5, which accounts for the odd angle at which the steam locomotive's boilers are placed. This is to ensure that the firebox is covered when on the move. The cylinders also do not connect directly to the wheels, having a rather strange offset, but this is because they also operate the cogs which engage with the racks mounted between the rails. The locomotives are not coupled to the single coaches that make up each train. they push them up the mountain so they're always at the lower end. This is because the railway has an accident record. On the opening day in 1896, a train was derailed and locomotive number 1 wrecked. Safety improvements were instigated before it reopened a year later, since when there have been no further fatalities. The only fatality on that occasion was a panicked passenger who jumped out of the train. The climb starts almost immediately beyond the station, climbing up and over a bridge over the first road the railway approaches. Here we can see the rack between the rails as the train climbs up the first part of the line. The driver is effectively just a lookout, the actual driver being in the engine. The first part of the line is through normal farmland, although the track is already climbing steeply. The first station is Hebron, just as the line comes out onto the open mountainside. Looking back from the train, we can see the Dinorwic quarries on the far side of Llyn Padarn. Halfway up the mountain is the imaginatively named halfway station, at which trains cross. In the far distance, another train can be seen following the one leaving halfway. Two trains will often occupy the same section at a time, contrary to normal practice on conventional railways. The railway is followed for much of its length by a footpath for the more energetic who want to climb the mountain themselves, or the less energetic who just want to go downhill. All seats on the trains are allocated when buying tickets, and you have to go back on the same train on which you rode up. Only if some passengers decide to walk down will there be space for those who have worn themselves out going up and want to ride back down. There's a surprising variety of vistas to be seen and variations in the terrain which the railway surmounts. This rocky ledge is near the top of the climb. There's also a great variety in the weather. Sometimes it can be clear below and misty at the top, or vice versa. When the weather closes in, it can be extremely cold up here, even in the middle of summer. The summit station board gives details of its height, and having nearly got to the top, it's a shame not to climb those last 66 feet, even if you are going back down again soon. In addition to the climb, you can visit the Summit Cafe and send letters franked with a Snowdon Summit cancellation. But after you've done all that, especially on a day like that seen here, you'll be ready to go down again.